Denise Hallbrook stood at the edge of my pasture, a rifle trembling in her hands, eyes locked on my bull like she was squaring off against a monster in her manicured nightmare. She called it property damage. Said Titan had trampled her flower bed and threatened the sanctity of her yard. But what she failed to realize, what she never bothered to consider, is that in this part of the country, you don't just point a weapon at a man's livestock and walk away like nothing happened. It wasn't just reckless. It was personal, and it was illegal. That moment, her finger resting too close to the trigger, Titan blinking slowly in her direction, unaware of the storm she was about to unleash, that was the tipping point, the day everything changed. But to understand how we got here, how Denise ended up ready to commit a felony over a bull chewing on clover, you've got to go back a few months. Back to when she first arrived in Chestnut Hollow with her lemon-colored sedan, her color-coded file folders, and her unshakable belief that rules were sacred, especially when she was the one making them. Chestnut Hollow was once a place where time moved a little slower, and nobody bothered you unless you left your gate open and your chicken started wandering into someone else's field. I carved out my life on a modest patch of land just west of town, far enough from the main road that I didn't hear traffic, but close enough to get feed and fencing when I needed it. I wasn't trying to build a kingdom. I just wanted peace. I kept to myself mostly, fixed up my old red tractor when it coughed in protest, rotated crops, raised a handful of livestock, including Titan, my prize bull. Titan wasn't just a showpiece. He was family, loyal, calm, massive as a freight train, and twice as proud. Kids from the local school used to stop by on field trips just to take photos with him. And then Denise moved in. She wasn't born here. That much was obvious. You could tell by the way she walked, deliberate, like every sidewalk was a stage. The house she bought sat just on the edge of the new development, where the developers had gotten greedy and stretched the HOA boundary line as far as it would go. She arrived with a clipboard, a forced smile, and an itch to fix things that weren't broken. At first, she complained about little things. The mailbox being too rustic, the wind chimes on my porch being audibly disruptive. She even left a handwritten note on my gate suggesting that I paint the barn a more community-conscious color. I ignored it. She didn't. What started as passive-aggressive notes turned into official-looking letters. She slapped me with fake fines, threatened citations for non-compliant fencing, and improper livestock management. It would have been laughable if it wasn't so persistent. But here's the part that really lit the fuse. Her garden, or more specifically, the water feeding it. At first, I thought it was just the rain. Denise's garden had flourished beyond anything I'd seen in Chestnut Hollow. Lush, vibrant, borderline unnatural for late summer. Peonies in full bloom, tomatoes bursting off the vine, grass greener than a golf course. It stood in stark contrast to the rest of the neighborhood, where folks were cutting back on watering, trying to stretch their wells through the drought. I didn't think much of it. Until my pressure tank started acting up, the water flow to my own house had slowed. Not stopped, but sluggish, like something was sapping strength from the well. At first, I blamed the pump, but after checking the lines and finding no leaks on my property, I began to suspect that maybe, just maybe, someone had helped themselves to what wasn't theirs. So I followed the line, and there it was, a thin PVC pipe, crudely buried behind her fence, trailing across the boundary line like a buried lie. It connected right into my well system through a homemade splitter, hidden behind a pile of mulch and a faux decorative rock. Sloppy, brazen, and completely illegal. She'd tapped into my water, my private well. No request, no permission, just quiet entitlement dressed up in the belief that her version of order excused her theft. I stood there staring at it, heart pounding, not with anger, but with resolve. Because while Denise Hallbrook was busy hosting HOA brunches and drafting violation notices with a glass of rose in hand, she had no idea she'd picked a fight with someone who believed in consequences. I didn't go to the police. Not yet. I didn't send a cease and desist letter or post about it online. No, I had something else in mind. She had tapped into my well to grow her little garden of Eden, so I decided to fertilize it. I waited a week, didn't say a word, didn't confront her, just kept mowing my pasture, fixing my fence posts, and watching from a distance as Denise pranced around her backyard like a suburban queen tending her royal grounds. She had no clue that the water feeding her fantasy was laced with something less than pure. See, I didn't just shut off the line. That would have been too easy, too obvious. What I did was legal, if a little unconventional. I consulted a plumber friend of mine, someone who dealt with enough rural cases to know all the tricks. We rigged the system so that her little siphon didn't just draw water anymore. It drew runoff, and not the clean kind. The next day I waited. At first, nothing changed. But by day 3 it started. The hydrangeas began to droop, the petunias brown at the edges. The tomatoes, once plump and gleaming, cracked open like overripe melons. The whole garden began to rot from the inside out. Denise tried everything. She called in landscapers, hauled in bags of imported soil, even installed a second irrigation timer, convinced it was a malfunction. But nothing worked, because the rot wasn't in her garden. It was in her arrogance. And watching her flail, watching the woman who once measured the angle of my mailbox now panic over wilting roses, was, I'll admit, deeply satisfying. She never figured it out, never suspected that her suburban utopia had been fertilized by her own hubris, and a perfectly legal plumbing adjustment. But while her garden faded, her anger bloomed, and that's when she turned her sights from the dirt to Titan, and that was her second and final mistake. It started with a voicemail, shrill, breathless, packed with rage. This is unacceptable. That animal, that bull, was grazing near my fence again. I swear, if he touches one more petal, I'll call animal control myself. I rolled my eyes and deleted the message. Titan hadn't done a damn thing wrong. He wasn't some wild creature rampaging through her begonias. He was calm, predictable, and never left the grazing section near the split-rail fence that bordered the pasture. He barely paid attention to anything that wasn't hay, grass, or the occasional apple one brought him. But to Denise, Titan was the embodiment of everything she couldn't control. He was loud when he wanted to be. He was massive. He was mine. And in her twisted logic, that made him a threat. A few days later, I got a text from Carl, my neighbor across the way, retired state trooper, the kind of guy who never said much unless it mattered. You might want to get home. Denise is in your yard, and she's not alone. I left the feed store without paying, practically peeled out of the lot. By the time I pulled into my drive, I saw them, Denise, 2 HOA board members, and, to my disbelief, a rifle in her hands. Not slung casually, not stored safely, aimed right at Titan. He was standing near the fence, completely still, chewing lazily like he always did, his eyes slow blinking, oblivious to the fact that a furious woman with a vendetta had drawn a bead on him like he was some kind of threat. I stepped out of my truck, voice steady, but my heart pounding like were drums in my ears. Put the gun down, Denise. She didn't flinch. That bull of yours has ruined my lawn for the last time. This is property damage. Property damage? I echoed, incredulous. You're seriously about to shoot a registered, prize-winning bull because he might have looked at your petunias the wrong way? Her hands were shaking. I couldn't tell if it was rage, fear, or sheer delusion. This is your last warning. I said, louder now, planted myself between her and Titan. What you're about to do isn't just reckless. It's a felony. And still, she didn't lower the rifle. Because Denise Hallbrook wasn't interested in logic. She wasn't interested in compromise. She was after control. And that meant she was willing to do something dangerous, unforgivable. I didn't know what would happen next. But I knew one thing. If she pulled that trigger, everything was going to change. I inched forward, my eyes locked on the barrel of the rifle. Titan stood behind me, motionless. Chewing grass like this was just another Tuesday. But I could feel his tension, too. He shifted his weight, the way animals do when they sense something isn't right. His chest rose slowly, his gaze flicking between me and Denise. Denise, I said, try and keep my voice even. This is not going to end the way you think. You're harboring a dangerous animal, she snapped. I have every right to defend my property. Defend it from what? A bull eating grass. That's when another voice rang out, Firm, low, and steady. Put the weapon down, Denise. Now. Carl. I turned and saw him jogging across the yard, his presence calm but commanding. Denim jeans, boots, and that worn flannel he always wore when he meant business. He didn't raise his voice again. He didn't have to. Denise turned, startled, and for a moment I saw it, that flicker of hesitation, the sharp crack in her armor. She recognized him not as a neighbor this time, but as a former cop, a man who knew exactly what she was doing, and how far over the line she'd already stepped. "Don't come any closer, Carl," she warned, but it didn't carry the same bite. She was shaking now, not with righteous fury, but with the weight of consequence creeping in. Carl slowed to a walk, hands raised. "I'm not here to fight you," he said. "I'm here to stop you from ruining your life. You're pointing a loaded rifle at someone's registered livestock. That's a criminal offense. Denise, that's jail time." She faltered. The board members behind her, silent until now, shifted uncomfortably. One of them looked like she wanted to back away entirely. Denise's mouth opened, but no words came out. Her finger, still near the trigger, began to tremble. Carl stepped closer. "You don't want to do this," he said quietly. "You want to be right. But this makes you wrong forever." And then she broke. She lowered the rifle, slowly, like the weight of it had finally caught up with her. And just like that, the storm passed. Titan blinked, took a step forward, kept chewing. I exhaled for first time in what felt like years. Denise backed away, lips pressed tight, face burning with defeat. But I knew that look. That wasn't surrender. That was retreat. She hadn't learned her lesson. She was just regrouping. And next time, she wouldn't bring a gun. She'd bring paperwork. And I was going to be ready. By sundown, the story had already made its rounds. Passed from porch to porch, over fences and across driveways, like wildfire on dry brush. Denise pulled a rifle on Titan. She was going to shoot Jackson's bull over flower bed? You're kidding. What the hell's wrong with her? I didn't need to say a word. The town did it for me. See, Chestnut Hollow isn't the kind of place that tolerates chaos. Folks here may be quiet, but they remember everything. And Denise had been throwing her weight around for months. Nitpicking paint colors, finding retirees from mailbox flags, demanding neighbors trim hedges to her liking. People didn't say much back then. They just swallowed it, grumbled in their kitchens, and moved on. But now she pointed a gun at a living, breathing creature, at my bull, a symbol, in many ways, of the town's quiet strength, of what we stood for. And suddenly, the silence broke. Carl, God bless him, wasn't subtle. He told the sheriff everything, not as a complaint, but as a record. He didn't press charges. Not yet, but he made sure it was on file, in writing, signed and sealed. I filed a report too, not out of vengeance, but to draw the line in ink. If Denise crossed it again, there wouldn't be any misunderstanding to hide behind. Then I got to work. I opened my binder, yes, a literal binder, of every letter she'd ever taped to my door, every HOA fine, every voicemail saved, every photo I'd snapped of her measuring my fence with a tape measure or scolding someone's kid for riding a scooter on the sidewalk. It was all there, a catalog of her tyranny, and I wasn't the only one. Turns out, half the neighborhood had their own version of that binder. People started coming out of the woodwork. One neighbor had been fined $200 for leaving holiday lights up 3 days past New Year's. Another had been cited for having a bird feeder that encouraged non-native species. It was absurd, exhausting. But now, we were done being quiet. I organized a meeting, nothing formal. Just a few chairs in my barn, a cooler of lemonade, and an open invitation. I figured 5 or 6 folks might show. 24 came. Some brought documents. Others brought stories. A few just came to say thank you. And by the end of that evening, one thing was clear. Denise didn't run Chestnut Hollow anymore. Not in our eyes. Not after Titan. Denise had ruled the HOA like a one-woman regime for nearly a year. But in just 3 days, the foundation beneath her began to crack. And this time, the cracks were loud. The barn meeting was just the start. Word of mouth became momentum. A few of the quieter board members, people who once stood behind her like loyal soldiers, started replying to emails they used to ignore. Linda Peterson, the treasurer, sent me a private message thanking me for organizing the meeting and asking, delicately, if she could see the documentation I had collected. "Between you and me," she wrote, "we've had concern for a while. We just didn't know how to stop her." That's how it always goes with people like Denise. Their power doesn't come from law or structure. It comes from intimidation and silence. But once the silence breaks, they've got nothing left to stand on. So I gave Linda everything. Photos, letters, time-stamped videos of Denise berating residents from her porch, screenshots of her HOA emails, where she exaggerated violations, manipulated rules, and conveniently skipped over anything requiring an actual board vote. And of course, the report of the rifle incident, which was now circulating quietly through official channels. 2 days later, the board called an emergency meeting. This time, I didn't have to attend. The community came out without being asked. 52 residents. Standing room only. Some brought their notices. Some brought their frustration. All of them brought their voices. And Denise? She walked in with her signature binder. Chin high, the same smug expression she'd worn since day one. But her confidence wilted the second she looked around that room. No polite greetings. No welcome smiles. Just the cold, united silence of people who'd finally had enough. When the meeting opened, Tom, one of the few board members who still had any credibility, read a statement. Calm, unapologetic, and devastating. It confirmed that Denise had, on multiple occasions, bypassed proper procedure, that several citations and fines had no legal standing, that the rifle incident was under review by local authorities. And then he said the words that landed like thunder. Effective immediately, Denise Hallbrook has been suspended from all HOA leadership responsibilities pending further investigation. No applause, just relief. A release of breath, long overdue. She stood there, lips trembling, gripping that binder like it could still save her. But it couldn't. The rules she twisted, the neighbors she bullied, the bull she nearly shot. It had all caught up with her. And for the first time in Chestnut Hollow, Denise Hallbrook was out of control. Suspension didn't sit well with Denise. That much was obvious. For a woman who lived for control, being sidelined, publicly and unanimously, wasn't just a blow to her ego. It was a collapse of her identity. So, naturally, she retaliated. Not with another rifle, thank God, but with paperwork. Lots of it. She went door to door, binder in hand, handing out flyers she designed herself, half rant, half manifesto. In bold letters, it declared that her suspension was illegitimate, that she was a victim of character assassination, and that the HOA board had been compromised by rural radicals who opposed modernization. I was apparently the ringleader of the so-called mutiny. Some neighbors tossed the papers in the trash before she even finished her pitch. Others politely declined and shut the door. A few die-hard supporters, those who'd benefited from a rule or just liked the feeling of power by association, nodded sympathetically. But even they looked uncertain now, because no matter what Denise said, she couldn't erase what people had seen. She couldn't erase the rifle. She couldn't erase the fines that didn't hold up. And she certainly couldn't erase the steady, growing unity of a neighborhood that had finally found its voice. When the next HOA meeting rolled around, a scheduled, public, transparent one without Denise at the helm, she showed up anyway, marched straight to the front, binder in hand, clipboard tucked under her arm like a shield. But this time, there was no chair for her. Linda, now acting president, stood calmly at the podium and addressed her directly. Denise, you've been suspended pending a full review. This meeting is for residents and authorized board members only. I am the board, she snapped. No, you're not, Tom replied evenly, stepping in beside her. Not anymore. There was a pause, a long one. She looked out over the crowd. Not a single friendly face. Not one nod of support. Just the quiet, determined eyes of community that had reached its breaking point. And for the first time, she stepped back. She didn't storm out. She didn't yell. She simply turned slowly and walked away. No entourage. No clipboard. Just silence. By the end of the week, a for sale sign appeared in her yard. The for sale sign went up quietly. No announcement. No farewell party. Just a sudden change in the rhythm of Chestnut Hollow. Denise packed her things over a weekend. Quickly, like she couldn't stand the sight of the place any longer. And truth be told, no one stood on the curb to wave her off. When the moving truck pulled out, a slow, easy calm settled over the neighborhood. The kind of calm we hadn't felt in months. Maybe years. It wasn't just that Denise was gone. It was that her shadow had lifted. People started coming out of their shells. Conversations at the mailbox turned from whispered complaints to easy laughter. Kids rode bikes through the cul-de-sac again, without fear of being cited for sidewalk congestion. Someone even painted their front door bright yellow, just because they liked it. No fines followed. As for me, I walked Titan to the edge of the pasture the morning after she left. The sun was warm, the breeze light, and for the first time in a long while, I didn't feel like I needed to keep one eye on the fence line. Titan ambled beside me, steady and unbothered like he always had. Big, calm, and utterly unaware that he'd been at the center of a neighborhood uprising. I scratched the top of his massive head. "Well, buddy," I said, "we won." He snorted, which I took as agreement. Later that afternoon, Carl dropped by with a six-pack and a grin. "Didn't think I'd see the day," he said, settling into a rocking chair beside me. "She really packed it in." I nodded. Guess the neighborhood decided it was time to stop being polite and start being free. We sat there for a while, two old souls content in the quiet. No shouting, no threats, no HOA citations tucked under windshields. Just peace. It wasn't perfect. No neighborhood ever is. But for the first time in a long while, it felt like home again. A place where people looked out for one another, not down on each other. Where a man could raise a bull, plant a garden, and paint his barn any damn color he pleased. And Denise? She became a cautionary tale. Not out of spite, but as a reminder, that power without respect crumbles fast. That you can only push people so far before they push back. As I sat on my porch watching the sun set over Titan's pasture, a thought struck me. All she wanted was control. All I wanted was peace. In the end, she lost both. And I still had my land, my bull, and the neighborhood I'd always known was worth standing up for. Let us know in the comments where you're watching from, and if you've ever had to stand up to someone like Denise. And remember, sometimes the quietest people make the loudest stand.